Last week's news was full of a space probe out near Saturn, and we're going to similarly harness cutting-edge technology today. And orbiting somewhere between Venus and Jupiter is a city called Bristol, and joining us from there is our first speaker. I'm really delighted to welcome Havi Carel, Professor of Philosophy at Bristol University. As you can see from the biography in your pack, Havi brings her skills as a philosopher to explore thinking and concepts and meaning around death, illness, and well-being. Havi also brings a personal perspective to her work, having had the life-changing experience in 2006 of being diagnosed with a serious, incurable and progressive respiratory illness, a condition which can make travel complex, hence the video link. So Havi is very familiar with presenting via Skype. The tech guys have done a great job in linking us up, and so I am the weak link in the system. If it goes wrong, it'll be my fault. So welcome, Havi. I'm hoping you can see me. Can you give us a wave?
Hey, hi everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. Yeah? Okay, great. I was really worried that this piece of music would be highly unoriginal, which I'm sure I am. I'm sure it's a piece that's familiar to everybody. And I just I thought I'd just start out by saying that the reason I chose it is also highly unoriginal. It's because it's a song I sang to both my boys when they were little, and I still find it very moving. And last week we sang it at a choir I attend, which is a singing group for people with respiratory conditions. And I found it every bit as moving and poignant. So it's, I think, a song that reminds me of hundreds and hundreds of nights, you know, when you put your little children to bed. And sometimes it's a bit tedious, but always when we would be, when I would sing to them, or later on we would sing the song together, it would always make life worth living. So I, of course, thinking about my funeral, I was thinking primarily about my children and what I'm going to leave for them and how they will get on in life and what they will go on to do. Kind of all the usual, I think, questions and worries, curiosities that people have when they think about their funeral. And my deep hope, of course, that they stay happy, and they always remember that the love I have for them is not going to be severed by, not even by death. So after this cheesy opening, I'll move on to the talks, and I'll have to put on my my professional hat, as it were, and I will start sharing the slides, which hopefully you'll be able to see. Is that okay? Can you see the slides? Good, fantastic. Okay, so now to my kind of professional life. So through the experience of being diagnosed with respiratory disease, that really impacted my philosophy and what I thought and felt philosophy should be. And of course, philosophy can be a very cerebral form of engagement, but I really want to show you and talk to you about how it can be embraced in a much more existential role to help people make sense of their illness experience, and to also help them in times of adversity and difficulty. And of course, end of life is a time of great adversity and great difficulty. And I think I've managed in sort of the last decade or so of work to pinpoint some important ways in which philosophy can be supportive. And I think there's an interesting sort of two-way connection between philosophy and illness. It's not that I only think that philosophy has interesting and insightful concepts and ideas to give people who are ill. I also think that the experience of illness itself and the experience of coming to terms with one's death and aging, and there's a cluster of experiences like that, are also unique in that they offer a real opportunity for edification, for learning, for if you want, developing particular virtues like patience and acceptance. So I really think philosophers also have a lot to learn from illness, which is something that sadly hasn't happened so much yet in my profession. But what I try to do also in my work is to remind philosophers that at the end of the day, we're living, breathing, vulnerable bodies and persons who are vulnerable to adversity, whose lives can be indelibly marked and changed by something like illness, but also other kinds of trauma, accidents, wars, bereavement, and so on. So I'd like you to kind of keep in mind this connection between that it's a two-way connection between philosophy and illness. So philosophy, what I'm going to do here now is offer some ways through which to think about experiences of illness, and in particular the experience of breathlessness, but also bear in mind the potentially edifying role philosophy, illness has to play as well. Okay, so why am I focusing on breathlessness? I'm focusing on breathlessness. This was partly triggered by my personal experiences, but of the intensity and the loneliness and the invisibility of that as a symptom, but also obviously because I was struck by how significant and how central this breathlessness is as a medical symptom in such a wide range of diseases. So respiratory disease, obviously cardiac, a lot of forms of mental disorder, and then virtually, I think, any illness you could think of, if it's serious enough and you're thinking about sort of end stages, then of course respiratory distress and breathlessness are almost always there. So my question is, what can we do about this symptom? How can we move away from thinking about it as a medical symptom to thinking about it as an experience, as something that people undergo? And of course, I'll talk in a minute about why breathlessness is, to my mind, such a unique symptom. Before I say that, I should say that the work I have done over the last 3 years was very generously funded by the Wellcome Trust. And we've set up a project called The Life of Breath, and you're very welcome to have a look at the website, join our mailing list, come to events, read our blogs, and or email me and ask for copies of any publication. So my suggestion is that a phenomenological analysis, which I'll demonstrate in a minute, can reveal to us these invisible and sometimes ineffable aspects of both breathing and breathlessness. Now, why is breathlessness so unique? I mean, it's a unique bodily function in several respects. I mean, first, I think it's unique because of the unconscious regulation of it can be consciously overridden. Of course, when people do breathing exercises or meditate or learn particular techniques to calm down if they have panic attacks, of course, these are all ways of overriding the unconscious regulation of breathing. So we do have this conscious connection to the way in which our lungs work, which we don't have in the case of kidneys, liver, and so on. So it's unique, I think, because it's got this dual kind of monitoring, and because we've got this very easy access to what the experience of breathing and breathlessness is like. The second reason it's unique is because I think it's, again, very uniquely connected to our emotional states. So if we're stressed, we scrunch up. If we're panicking, we breathe fast. If we are relaxed, we have slow, steady breathing. And of course, that connection has also been exploited by a lot of approaches like yoga, meditation, mindfulness techniques, this idea that by slowing down the breathing, by controlling it, by becoming aware of it, by practicing it, we can improve our well-being. And finally, again, going back to kidneys and livers maybe don't have much cultural or spiritual significance, but breathing certainly does. And of course, when you think about end of life, the thing that people, I think, talk about a lot and the thing that they're very scared of is being unable to breathe. And indeed, breath can also be almost be seen as a metaphor for life itself. When you think about the dying person's last breath and those kinds of images, or indeed the baby's first breath, we can see that in a way, breathing is taken as a metaphor for life itself. So I can skip all this because I think a lot of you are medically trained and will know all this. But the one thing to really emphasize that really surprised me when I started speaking to respiratory specialists is that their understanding of breathlessness is actually very nuanced and complex. And indeed, the experience of breathlessness does not stem from a single bodily source, but maybe based on input from, as you can see, a number of physiological indicators. So if we think a little bit about the experience of breathlessness, what is it like? Well, it's severely distressing, but of course it's very different to pain. There is some interesting contemporary work on the neuroscience of breathlessness that shows that the same brain pathways are activated in pain as are in breathlessness and also in hunger and thirst. So there's a feeling of distress and discomfort, but it's again not quite that of pain. Going back to this idea of invisibility, of course, it's completely overwhelming. And think about it, being unable to breathe, not being able to catch your breath, feeling your breath all the time, compressed or stifled or not getting in enough or getting out enough. That's a very overpowering sensation. But of course, it's also invisible. It's not dramatic, like, I don't know, bleeding or vomiting, where, you know, it's all out there. It can be a very internal experience. And that led Geisels and Higginson to term it an invisible disability. And it's invisible first because when you're undergoing an experience of severe breathlessness, you won't necessarily be doing anything very dramatic. You'll probably just be standing or sitting very still trying to catch your breath. But also, as people become increasingly breathless, of course, their mobility is reduced. They become housebound and eventually bedridden. So, of course, you don't see all these breathless people out in the street so much, and also maybe not in the clinic. The first person articulations of breathlessness, so people talk about feeling trapped and being about to die, suffocating, drowning. There's a real sense of that the sense of loss of control over the breathing also, again, represents a more general loss of control and a lot of kind of catastrophizing thinking that goes along with it. And I think it's worth making a clear distinction between people who have panic attack but don't have an underlying respiratory condition and people who have an underlying respiratory condition where the sense of doom and the loss of control is obviously more objectively justified, if you like. So now thinking a little bit about the physiological features of breathlessness, but also of illness more generally. And this is the model I've been working on for about 10 years, trying to think how to articulate the experience of illness without simply reducing it to physiological processes or what I call disease, making this distinction between disease, the physiological process, and illness, which is the human experience of that process. And of course, one very striking feature, I think, of many, if not all illnesses, is that you find that illness causes your own world to shrink and even to become hostile. So phenomenologists have long been talking about how your embodiment, the conditions and possibilities of your body determine what you can be. So of course, we're not all Usain Bolt, so we can't run like he runs. We're probably not able to dance and scuba dive and swim and do lots of other activities as well as other people. But of course, in illness, that sense of embodiment as restriction is much more accentuated. And as the illness progresses, people often talk about how their world shrinks, how they can't go to places they used to go, how things become more difficult and complicated, things like travel, for example. And indeed, how the terrain that was once familiar and home-like becomes hostile. And of course, the restriction here is not just a physical restriction of where you can physically go and how you get there, but also a restriction of choices and freedom. And that's, I think, the really fundamental phenomenological insight that I I very much agree with in my work, which is that when you restrict somebody's physical possibilities, you also restrict their ways of being. You also restrict their agency. So if you think about a project, say, working in your allotment or growing cabbages in your allotment, then of course, if you have a limitation like respiratory illness, then everything becomes difficult or restricted or even impossible. So you can't push the wheelbarrow and you can't bend down very well. You have to do everything very slowly. You can't walk to the allotment, so you need a parking space, sorry. So really, I think that the way in which these restrictions accumulate means that they become much more than simple kind of practical constraints that can be overcome. I think if you accumulate enough of these kinds of restrictions, there comes a point where the project, the one of having an allotment, is simply defined by restriction rather than by possibility. And of course, I'm sure you're all aware that there's a vicious cycle of self-limitation and deconditioning. So programs such as pulmonary rehab are meant to address those. But thinking about the kind of existential or psychological aspect, people who have severe breathlessness often talk about the sense of helplessness they have, despair, fear, anxiety, and of course depression, which is a pronounced accompaniment to panic disorders that often accompany respiratory problems. And another way to think about these is this concept of bodily doubt, which I developed in a 2013 paper. So if you think about your relationship to your body, you could say that it's characterized by a sense of tacit bodily trust, right? You're not sitting there thinking, am I going to be able to keep down the coffee and pastry I just had? Or is my heart going to continue beating? Or will my eyes continue to be able to see? Right, so there's a lot of tacit trust we have towards our bodies, and a lot of ways in which we unreflectively rely on the body. Right, you get up, you walk outside and get a coffee, and you think, yeah, of course, my legs. You're not kind of thinking, oh, I hope my legs will get me there. You just kind of know that they will, as it were. And it's this feature of sort of taken for grantedness that is disrupted in illness through this experience that I call bodily doubt, which is the transition from the sense of bodily trust, which again is tacit and unarticulated, to a sense of doubt. Will I be able to get there? Can I make it to the toilet on time? Will I be able to shout out for help if I need it? So again, lots of things that I think healthy embodiment takes for granted become subject to this kind of experience of bodily doubt in illness. Another way of thinking about this transition is thinking about the body simply losing its transparency. So philosophers such as Jean-Paul Sartre, which probably most of you have heard of, and others which you probably haven't, have written about the body, healthy body, as being transparent or taken for granted, or kind of given to us in an unreflective way. Just take granted health, and we take for granted that we can do all these things that we can with our bodies. And we relate to the world through our bodies, but not by focusing on them. So if you're cycling to work, for example, you're probably thinking, oh, I'm a bit late, or I forgot to bring my packed lunch, or did I remember my lock, or whatever. You're not actually thinking about your legs pedaling and your lungs working to give you enough oxygen to do the pedaling, and how you're balancing yourself on the bike and so on. And again, that's the kind of, and it's a good thing, right? It's a good thing that you don't have to think about it. This loss of transparency is what happens when we can no longer take for granted all of these things. And of course, it's a painful and very limiting experience, this loss of transparency. And of course, in all illness, but in particular in breathlessness, daily activities become a problem. How do I carry my groceries home? How do I bend down to get something from under the sofa? And again, I'm assuming a lot of you are health professionals, and you know that something as simple as bending down to pick up a pen can be a challenge for people who are extremely breathless. Another way of thinking about this is Heidegger's characterization of human existence as sein können, or being able to be. And he says, well, what human existence is characterized by is this uniqueness, this openness, this freedom to choose what you want to be, and this ability to be, which of course transforms itself into a being unable to be in the case of illness. So I'm going to skip ahead because I'm very, very keen to hear your thoughts on this stuff. So I will skip a little bit. Okay. Another feature is the disruption of intelligibility that we find in illness. So illness just disrupts the meaning structures that we use in our everyday life. And if you think about it, that meaning comes in part at least from the kinds of habits and routines we have. You know what you're doing today. You're going to a conference, or you're going to work. You're dropping off the kids at work. At school. You're going to buy something. You're booking a holiday. All of these are kind of meaning structures. But of course, if somebody gets a diagnosis of a serious health condition, and especially if the prognosis is uncertain, or then you start asking yourself, what's the point of booking a holiday? What's the point of going to work? And of course, ultimately, that's the kind of big existential claim. There is no point, as it were, other than you wanting to do it. And the discovery of the pointlessness, or at least this questioning that ought to really accompany our living as reflective creatures, is a big feature of what I earlier called the potential edification by illness. Now, of course, this disruption is particularly acute at pivotal moments. So, somebody falls down and breaks a hip. That's a pivotal moment where intelligibility is disrupted. A family member is diagnosed with a mental health condition. That's a pivotal moment. And I think as health professionals, one thing from my own experience, that around the time of diagnosis, there was a lot of kind of medical talk, but very little talk about what the medical condition is going to mean, and how I'm going to get my head around it, and how I'm going to regain this intelligibility, or be able to reconstruct the meaning structures that all became disrupted through my diagnosis. Another, I think, theme, the one I want to finish off with is that of disruption and loss. And of course, there's a very negative and sad side to illness. And I've so far emphasized, I've talked about edification and so on. But of course, this narrowing down, the shrinking down of the world, the loss of opportunities, and having to relinquish activities, these are all very, very sad things. And, one of the saddest things for me was not being able to cycle anymore. So, again, thinking pragmatically, the arrival of the electric bike was a huge thing for me, because it allowed me to carry on doing something I loved. If you've ridden an electric bike, you will know that it's nowhere near as fun as riding a push bike, but it's a way of kind of maintaining some of the meaning, some of the habits that I previously had. And I think what we find in illness is just this continuous reworking of the boundaries of what is possible. Finding a challenge, say, can't cycle anymore, thinking of a solution, say an electric bike, going on to that. And then, of course, as the disease progresses, then maybe the electric bike is no longer possible, and so on. But there's a constant negotiation, and sometimes the little things that people manage to do give them a huge sense of pride and autonomy, much beyond what I think a normal person would attribute to these activities. So, of course, in illness, the bodily habits are lost or reconfigured, and the body very simply just becomes a problem, an obstacle to things you want to do, and even a stranger. And there's a big, I think, literature and philosophy of medicine about the alienation people feel from their bodies, especially if you think of something like cancer, where you think there's an enemy within me that has to be taken out, and so on. Okay, so maybe just one last point. I think that's my watch. I think another interesting feature of breathlessness, of respiratory conditions, is the discrepancy between objective measurements that you get through doing lung function tests and subjective assessments people give of their functionality. And in a well-known paper from 2001, Jones argued that patients very routinely and very substantially over or underperform. So you get two patients, roughly the same age, roughly the same lung function, then one of them is still, I don't know, working, looking after their kids, going for long walks with the dogs. The other one is housebound. And I think what this exemplifies is another quite interesting philosophical idea, that we have to distinguish between these two perspectives of the body. The objective perspective, expressed here through the lung function test results, and the body as it is lived by the ill person. Okay, so I'll just conclude, because otherwise, okay, so I could talk for hours, but okay. So why is it important, I think, this phenomenological approach, which I tried to demonstrate to you? I think the phenomenological approach can give us an account of the richness and diversity of the particular experience. In this case, I focused on breathlessness, but of course you can use this technique, you can use this methodology to give an account of any other illness experience. And it's also helpful to focus on the subjective, because of the possibility it gives us to articulate the positive, if unintended, consequences of suffering. So, of course, nobody goes out there thinking, oh, I'll become ill, it'll be really great because I'll get all this edification and I will learn all these deep lessons about life. But I think it is worth saying to people that these kinds of experiences of adversity do open us up, I think, to edification, to learning, to wisdom. And the types of edification or other positive consequences that have been documented include, for example, improving personal relationships. So Jonathan Haidt has written about how people come together at times of hardship. Of course, this is a bit of a generalization. I'm sure there's lots of times where people don't come together, and indeed times when illness in the family causes strife and disconnect. The second one is a sense of purpose and focus. So giving somebody a prognosis that is time limited. You might say, well, we'll give this person the sense that they have limited time and they need to use it wisely. And of course, this ever elusive notion of resilience, which I'm quite interested in, but philosophy hasn't been explored very much. This idea that some people cope with their illness or with their prognosis much better than others. And again, Jonathan Haidt came up with this notion of post-traumatic growth, where he talks about how people who undergo trauma come out the other side with increased resilience, with increased self-understanding, with better personal relationships. So the role, I think, of my work is, of course, to express the difficulty and severity of breathlessness, but also to articulate this very interesting notion that came up in the nursing literature in the 90s of wellness within illness. So to articulate the possibility of feeling well and being well within the constraints of, say, a chronic condition like COPD. So I think breathlessness is interesting. I hope I've explained why, because it's a juncture of the physiological, psychological, potential, spiritual, and cultural. The whole point of the Life of Breath project is to suggest that it can't be studied solely as a medical symptom, but has to be understood much more broadly. And that this phenomenological framework I've described to you provides conceptual tools through which to study breathlessness as an experience. So thank you very much. And these are some of the papers I've got. Again, I'm happy to send people PDFs. This is the cover of my book, Illness, that I wrote about philosophy of illness and my own experience of diagnosis and so on. And I'm very happy to further communicate with anyone who's interested. So one particular line of interest in our current work in the Life of Breath project is thinking about end-of-life palliative care as places where breathlessness is very prominent and requires special attention. So if anybody has any thoughts or interests in that area, please do email me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Havi. And you've stuck brilliantly to time, so we have a chance for some reflections or questions from the floor. And we have roving mics available to come to anyone who's got a question. Okay, there's a question here.
It's a comment.
Comment. Can you go up to the mic just in the...
Hello, I'm Danuta Orlovska, lecturer in Palliative Care at St Columba's Hospice, also work as a psychologist in the National... Sorry, shall I start again?
Yes, please.
I'm Danuta Orlovska, lecturer in Palliative Care at St Columba's Hospice, also work as a clinical psychologist in a cancer team in London. I wanted to say thank you very much for your talk and for your book, which I have used the theme of wellness within illness with one or two of the patients that I have supported in my role as a clinical psychologist. One or two have bought the book and found it incredibly helpful as a way of dealing with their own experience of illness. So thank you very much indeed.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted you say that, because I really, I wrote the book. I mean, so the condition I have, which is LAM or lymphangiomyomatosis in short, is very, very rare. Its incidence is something like between 3 and 5 in a million. So when I was diagnosed, I felt very lonely, and when I wrote the book, I thought, I hope the book goes out to other people who fall and also feel lonely. So I'm really pleased to say that. Thank you very much.
Okay. More. There's one right up at the back, Susan.
You did this on purpose.
Are you hearing the questions all right, Havi?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi there, good morning. Dean Buchanan from Tayside. Thank you very much for that talk. I work in palliative care in the acute hospital setting, and much of what you're saying, I think, has a great resonance for hospital patients. My question is, how do we draw out that side of people's experience in a busy hospital setting? Any tips on that matter?
So, yeah, thanks very much. One thing I tried to develop and then kind of left to health professionals, I developed a patient workshop which uses ideas from phenomenology to help people come together as a group and think about their experiences through these phenomenological concepts I was describing. So moving away from the physiological or the biometrical understanding of their illness to a more existential, if you like. And I've got the kind of skeleton of the workshop, and I'm very happy to send you the paper. I think it's fairly straightforward to get a bunch of people in a room and give them space to talk about their experiences. And I'm happy to talk to you more and send you the paper and discuss how that's possible. But that's one way, I think, where you would probably only really need a facilitator to allow these conversations. And other possibilities, thinking of the same kind of group that is mixed, where you have patients and health professionals talking together. Of course, that doesn't answer the time question so much. I think the time constraints are there, so I think facilitating self-run groups is one way of addressing the issue of how do you get to talk about these things in a kind of time-constrained environment. But there might be other ways as well. I don't know if you've heard of what they call Schwartz rounds. Schwartz rounds. It's an American idea named after a fellow called Schwartz who had died of cancer and wanted to make an opportunity for people to do sort of a ward round, but a ward round that's about non-medical aspects of the case that are about, say, a moral dilemma or communication difficulty or something like that. And again, they're not very time-consuming. They usually take place once a month during a lunch hour. And people can just come up and one person describes a case they found difficult or challenging, again, for non-medical reasons. And the hour is used to discussing those aspects rather than the kind of medical aspects. So I think there's lots of ways in which the basic format is getting people in the room, giving them an opportunity to talk about these things. But as ever, finding the time to do that is, I agree, always a challenge.
Yes, we've got a question here. I don't know who the nearest mic is.
There's one on the table.
Or maybe just go use the one outside or there. That would be great. I think you just need to press the button once you get there.
Hello, I'm Kim Steele. I'm a palliative care consultant in Fife. My question is, should we have clinical philosophers as part of our medical teams?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. But I also think that, we're all capable of philosophical reflection. I think indeed, we all do it without even knowing that it's the discipline called philosophy. I'm not particularly up on the academic side of philosophy. But I teach medical students here at Bristol. I'm routinely struck by how little time is given to the big questions. How do you deal with the death of your patients? How do you support people when they, break to pieces? But again, I think it's changed a lot of efforts in revising medical curricula. I think have been in that direction. But it's kind of almost, I think, something people need to remind themselves of all the time, which is, at the end of the day, this is someone's life, this is someone's death or dying moments. And all the complexity and the emotional labor involved in that is something that I think has to be much more acknowledged and brought before. I don't know, I've not done any shadowing work in a palliative care setting, so I don't have any first-hand experience of it. But from experience and what I've read about other specializations, that is really sorely needed, is the honesty and the modesty and the openness to be able to witness and to an extent, contain and support human suffering in general. So the answer is yes, but I think in a way health professionals have that capacity within them that just really has to be maybe developed or nurtured more.
Okay. I think we've got time for one more comment or question. Once, I don't know whether there's a mic just to your left, Scott. That's great.
Scott Murray, GP.
Just press the button, Scott.
Scott Murray, a GP from Edinburgh. I'm struck that all you say is relevant to people when they start to become breathless before they possibly are considered as palliative or very advanced. And that what you're saying is a talk to, you know, chronic illness care as well as palliative care. Any comments on that? So what I'm hearing is a call for sort of early palliative care, possibly this holistic care, and thinking about the illness disruption, you know, from when it starts rather than just maybe in the terminal stages.
Okay, sorry, Mark, can you repeat that to me?
I'm just wondering when this approach that is really great of holistic care and thinking about these different aspects, when it should be triggered in the course of the illness.
When should it be triggered?
Yeah,
Well, I think right from the beginning, right? So again, there's a big medical sociology literature on diagnosis, and I think when you actually read accounts written by people who were misdiagnosed or diagnosed belatedly, they often say, I walked around with these symptoms months or years. You know, people didn't understand me, or people didn't believe me. They didn't think that my suffering was serious or that it was genuine. I think the sense of being heard and being believed is very core to a successful illness experience, if you can put it like that. So I don't think there's a time that is too early for starting to think about these ways in which illness is life transforming. And again, I think I probably said it already, but I do think that the time of diagnosis, which is maybe not really the time that you're particularly involved, but the time of diagnosis is enormously significant. That is the time where the disruption of intelligibility, the biographical disruption, the life crisis happen. And you know, you talk to somebody who's had a chronic illness for 10 years, they're in a completely different place. But I would say just simply modifying the way in which we understand it is a task for all health professionals and indeed for the whole of society.
Thanks very much. Sounds like diagnosis of the life-threatening illness then. Okay, yeah. Thank you, that's great, thanks.
So I think that's us for time, Havi, but I just wanted to thank you for joining us from Planet Bristol, and for sharing both your philosophical but also your personal reflections on this whole experience. And it's been fantastic to hear what you've had to say and to share. I'll be certainly interested to have a look at some of the papers and stuff that you've offered to share. So if we could all thank Havi again.